So today we will do something fun. We will create a generative sequencer that all we have to do is hold a chord or use a chord sequencer, and it will arpeggiate randomly. It will arpeggiate in a generative manner this chord, and we'll create all sorts of interesting results that we can either use and record as they are, or we can then record the Midi in a DAW and edit it in all sorts of ways just to get inspiration. Right, so the main module we will use today is the super arpeggiator from Count Modular. Basically, an arpeggiator will take a set of notes in a chord and will play the notes one after the other, arpeggiating the chord. But this arpeggiator has really interesting features that can create, again, really unique results. So first of all, again, I'm using my key step. Later on, we'll see this also with the chord sequencer. And I want to have, let's say, a polyphony of up to 8 voices. So in the right-click menu, I can choose polyphony channels 8. This means that I can play up to 8 notes together, and the arpeggiator will arpeggiate them. So the pitch information, the volt per octave, will go to the volt per octave input of the arpeggiator, the gate as well. Right, and the voice I will use today will be the FM operator. Of course, you can use any other voice you want. Later on, we will see also that we can create interesting results also with polyphony. So maybe it's better if you choose a polyphonic oscillator or polyphonic voice. You can use also VSTs like pianos and stuff like this, which can work really nicely. So again, the pitch information from the arpeggiator will go to the FM operator and the gate as well. Now, when I play something, there is nothing going on because we need to clock also the arpeggiator to tell it basically when and in which rate to arpeggiate the chord or to play the different notes. Now, again, I want to do this in a generative manner, right? So I'm going to create a generative clock. There are many ways to create generative clocks in Modular. I'm going to use an LFO. Right, I will use the wavetable LFO from VCV and take the wavetable position, all the way to the right, which will give me a pulse wave or a square wave. This we will use as the clock for the arpeggiator. Right, and now if I hold, for example, 3 notes, basically, we will get those 3 notes arpeggiated, right? But I want to do this again generatively. So I'm going to use sample and hold. I'm going to use the super sample and hold from Count Modular, which has also probability, right? Which will add even more randomness and will make this even more generative. So let's take this to about 60%. And now this I will use to modulate the rate of the LFO, and the LFO will be the clock or the trigger for the sample and hold. So we have a sort of a feedback loop, right? The LFO is clocking or triggering the sample and hold, and the sample and hold in return is modulating the LFO, which is triggering the sample and hold, which is modulating the LFO. So we get a sort of a feedback loop, and this can create a really interesting generative clock. So now if I add some modulation here with the attenuverter, and again, I hold the same 3 notes, right? You can hear that the notes are being played more or less in a generative way. Maybe we can take the frequency, the overall frequency, the rate of the LFO a bit down. Right? So there is some movement there in the clock. It's a bit jittery and a bit more generative. Okay, now this was step 1. Right, now this sequencer has, first of all, a nice feature that it can play, not this sequencer, this arpeggiator, like many other arpeggiators, it can play the notes randomly. So it will not play them in order, it will play them randomly, which is great for generative sequencing. So now let's say that I will hold 4 notes, basically C an octave up, E flat and G. Right, and you can see here the number of notes I'm holding. Right, already it will move randomly between the different notes. It will not play one after the other. Right, it jumps 4, it will jump to 2, then 3, and then 4 again. Right? And of course, this will be even more amazing if we hold even more notes, right? So I can do something like this. Now I have 8 notes. Right, now there is another interesting feature of this arpeggiator. We can have up to 8 different steps, and each step can have different settings. So if I take this to 8, you can see now we have here 8 steps, right, for the arpeggiator. And I can say, for example, that step number 2 will always be an octave up, and I can say that step number 6 will always be an octave down, which means that each note that lands on step number 2, and again, because they are moving in a random way, right? They are moving randomly, they are jumping randomly for one another. It will always be a different note. So the notes that will land on step number 2 will be an octave up, and the notes that will land on step number 6 will be an octave down. So we get now something even more interesting. Again, I will just hold 4 notes for now. Maybe I can make the clock a bit quicker, something like this. Right? Right, so this is already something interesting. Now, another feature of this arpeggiator is that we can add accents to different steps, and the accents we can use for anything really, because again, it's modular, it's fun, right? So I can choose, for example, that whenever the note is being transposed an octave up, right, what we set now, it will also be accented by activating this button here, right? This is the accent button, right? And now I have here the accent output, and this will go to the sustain level of the FM operator. And now I have to open the attenuator all the way up, which means that whenever it will play an octave up, the notes will sustain also longer. Right? Now, to get the full effect of this, we have to use, or we can use, polyphony, because then each note will have its own channel, and they will not choke one another, they will not stop one another, right? Because it's a monophonic voice now, when one note plays and then comes the other note will stop the first note even though it's still playing, right? So this will make sure that the notes will ring out longer. So now what we have to do, we right-click the super arpeggiator and we can have polyphonic outputs, right? And now each note will have a different channel. Again, in this case, it will be up to 8 different channels, 8 notes. Now, there are a few ways we can do this now. You can leave it as is if you are using a polyphonic mixer. I'm using here the MindMeld, which is polyphonic. So basically, you can leave it as it is if you are not using a polyphonic sequencer, because you have to keep polyphony in the chain, right? If now I will use a monophonic module after this polyphonic voice, I might have issues. So if you are not using a polyphonic module, mixer or whatever, or reverb or delay, then you can use, for example, the sum module, right? It will take the polyphonic signal, and if I play something, right, for now we have 4 channels, right? It will take it and will sum it into a monophonic signal. What I like to do is I like to use a spreader. This one is for Moskva or Mokba. It will take the channels and will spread them in the stereo field, so we have something a bit nicer and more spread out, right? So this will have a stereo output, and I will use here, okay, never mind the color coding for now, right? I also take the level a bit down. So now the voices will be spread in the stereo field and they will ring out, so one note will not stop the other one. So again, if I hold just 4 notes, this is a bit lower in levels. right? So we have, first of all, we have some stereo field enhancement. And the notes, they don't stop one another. Right, we have polyphony. And now we can take this even another step further and add some modulation. So if I add, for example, the sample and hold from Bog Audio, right? It has two sections, so I can use two sample and holds, right? It's also polyphonic, which means that each voice will get different modulation, right? Different signals, which is quite fun. And now in the right-click menu, I can set its range. So I'm going to choose, it's already set actually to 0 to 10 volts. So it's just unipolar signal. And I can add also some glide. So I can add some slew to it. I can show you this also on the scope, right? So this will be basically the sample and hold. You can see it's a stepped random voltage, right? But if I add some glide to it, let's say about 1200 milliseconds, you can see that it's not stepped anymore. It will glide from one value to another. And why I'm doing this is because I want to use it for velocity, for the level. So I don't want the level to jump from one to another, from one value to another, because this will create clicks. So I add some slew to it, right? So we can add also velocity. So I'm going to use the same gate from the arpeggiator, right, which is polyphonic, which means that each voice will get a different sample and hold value, different velocity. And there's another thing we have to do in the FM operator. We have to right-click it and change it to linear level response, because otherwise it will not really work as it should. It will be much lower in levels, right? And then the sample and hold I will use in the level input, which is again also polyphonic, so each voice will have different velocity. So now if I hold again just the 4 notes, right, we have also velocity. Something that I will change here, I will take the probability here a bit up, so there is a bit more change in the LFO rate. Right, now I can also use this sample and hold to randomly change the timbre of this voice through the feedback amount. If I again hold the notes and I change the feedback, right? There will be much more brassier, something a bit more harmonically rich. So I can use the lower part of the sample and hold, which is, by the way, normal to the upper part. So I don't have to use the same gate. It will be triggered with the upper part. So I can just send this to the feedback level. Already I opened the attenuator in this case, and now we have even more variation. Again, just 4 notes. These are only 4 notes, and listen to how much variety we have. I can also create a whole progression, so something like this, let's say. right? So cool, something like this. And this is the main idea. Again, there are a few variations that I want to show you, so let's have a look. Okay, so let's say that you still want something generative, but you want it to be synced to a clock. Again, if you are using a DAW, you want to record these sequences and then chop them and use them in your composition, but you want it to be synced to a clock. So you can use something like chances, which is again also from Count Modular. This will add probability to the clock, right? So here I'm using a clock multiplied by 4, basically 16th notes. This is going to chances, and then as you can see here, according to the probability control, to the chance control, this clock will sometime come out of output A or sometime output B, and I'm using output A to clock the arpeggiator. I have here exactly the same setup, right? I have again the FM operator with the sample and hold and the stereo spreader, and the arpeggiator is set more or less the same, right? So now if I hold, let's say 4 notes, they will still be generative, but they will be synced to the clock. Right, so there is still timbre changes, there are still velocity changes, and all of this is synced to the clock. So if, for example, I have here a few things going on, I have here some rhythm with a bass drum and hi-hat from Tremor. I have here a bass voice going also through some delay. It will sound like this. Right? And now I can play this again. It will be more or less generative. I just have to hold notes on my keyboard and it will arpeggiate them randomly, generatively, and this will be again synced to the clock in this case. So this is another variation. In this case, I'm not using the key step, I'm not using Midi. I have chords coming directly from VCV-Rec. You can use any chord sequencer you like. You can also send, if you're using a DAW, you can send chords from your DAW into VCV-Rec, make this processing with the arpeggiator, send them back to your DAW, record the Midi or sequence all sorts of different things there. I'm using the Aaron static modules. You see I have the scale CV and the atonic CV. This is basically generating the chords. I have two ADDR sequencers sequencing the chord type and the chord itself. So now we have E flat major 7/9. Right now we have F minor 9th. We have all sorts of different chords there. Again, this is synced to the clock. It will be more or less generative or random, I guess. But it will be synced to the clock. Again, I'm using chances also from Count Modular, and my voice is more or less the same. Again, the FM operator with the velocity, with the timbre control through the feedback and everything. But in this case, I'm also using some delay with the Chronoblob 2 from All Right devices. So now what we have to do again, we have to use polyphonic pitch, just like we've seen before. With Midi, I had up to 8 channels. Here we will have the chord output. In this case, it's 5 channels. Different chords might have 4 channels, depends how many notes they have. Right, so this will go to the volt per octave of the super arpeggiator. And now we need also a gate. Now I will use the same gate I'm using, the same clock that I'm using to drive the diatonic CV to switch between the chords. But this gate has also to be polyphonic. Because we need the same number of channels. So let's say that I want to have up to 8 channels. I'm not so sure which chords have 8 notes in them in this case, but let's say again up to 8 notes. Right, so I have to multiply, I have to duplicate basically the number of gates, and for this I will use the polymult from Bog Audio. It will take a monophonic signal and will duplicate it into a polyphonic signal. I can set the amount of the number of channels here. So if I set this to 8, right, and I use the same clock that I have here, this will go to the input, and now from the output I will get a polyphonic gate with 8 channels, as you can see here. Again, I think in this case 8 is too much, but just in case. And now already it will start playing, as you can hear. Again, it will take those chords from in this case, the sequencer, the chord sequencer, the diatonic CV. It will arpeggiate the notes, but thanks to the interesting features of this arpeggiator, it will do this in more or less in a generative way. So we have some control, right? It's not fully random, but still it will have the module itself, the arpeggiator will have also something to say about it, right? And this can create interesting and inspiring results. Again, just to put this in context, I have here a few more voices. I have here energy as another voice, as a sort of a bass, right? And I have some drums here with Tremor 2 and the hi-hats from Hora. Another fun thing we can try is using external trigger gate sequencers, rhythm sequencers. So I will hold a chord and the trigger sequencers will play each chord in a different rhythm. Let me show you how this can work. Right, I have here 2 Euclidean sequencers, also from Count Modular, and another trigger sequencer, again from Count Modular. Lovely modules, lovely collection. I have here more or less the same voice. I have the FM operator, again, going through this stereo spreader, and I have sample and hold modulating its feedback, which basically means the timbre of the voice. Right, and this is going to be, again, a polyphonic voice because I want to hold the chord and let the sequencers trigger the different notes in different times. So first of all, the Midi to CV module that I use with my key step is set to a polyphony of 5 notes, so I can play up to 5 notes. This is the number of sequencers that I'm going to use. I'm going to use 5 sequencers. If you want more notes, you will have to use Opalach. You will have to use more sequencers, of course. Right, so now what I will do, I will send the pitch directly from the Midi module directly to the FM operator. Right, again, we have 5 channels of polyphony. And now I'm going to combine those different sequences into one polyphonic signal. So I'm going to take the Euclidean sequencers and send them into merge from VCV. This will merge monophonic signals into a polyphonic signal, with, in this case, it will have 5 channels. You will see this here in a second. So now we have 1 channel. Now we will have 2 channels, as you can see here. And now another sequencer, 3, another one, 4, and another one, 5. So we have 5 sequencers. Each one will trigger a different note, right? And now have a listen to what's going on when I connect it already to the FM operator. It will already start playing. Even when I don't hold anything, I don't have a chord set, I'm not holding anything and it's playing. Now if I hold a chord, now it's playing, but this is not what I want, right? And I want only when I play a chord, then everything will start playing. Of course, it's modular. There are many ways we can do this. I'm going to use end logic, which means that only when the gates from the sequencers are playing and when I hold a chord, only then they will come out, right, of the gate output and will gate the FM operator, right? So basically I'm combining the gates. So now what I'm doing, I'm going to send this polyphonic signal right from the merge into the end logic, and I'm going to use the gate output from the Midi module, again, only when those sequencers are playing and when I hold a chord. So when the gate is high from the MIDI module, only then this whole thing will come through to the FM operator. So now you see I connected it. There is nothing. Now I will hold the chord and it will start. I will let go of the chord and it will stop, right? So this is an end logic. Of course, it's modular. You can use also a VCA for this if you want, which is also a sort of an end logic. But this is the way I choose to use it. So I'm going to hold now 5 notes. Right? Right, and basically you can see like this, we get the rhythm. Each note gets its own sequencer. We have 2 Euclidean sequencers and a few more trigger sequencers. You see here I have 8 steps, here I have 7 steps, here I have 5 steps. So you can really mix and match and create really interesting results, really interesting sequences. One thing I forgot is to connect the end output also to the sample and hold. So the sample and hold will also be triggered by the same gates, and this will change the feedback. I'm going to play this for a bit because it's fun. Thank you for watching. I hope this was fun. I hope this was helpful. Go experiment with this. There is a lot more you can do. Of course, this is just a short video demonstrating this. Cheers, have fun.